The RCMP admits it made a security mistake in the preparations for the Prime Minister's trip to India last February. They failed to tell Justin Trudeau's protection detail that a convicted attempted murderer had been invited to attend events on the trip. The revelation is contained in a security review report released late today to the House of Commons and the Senate. Conservatives immediately pounced, complaining too much confidential information was blacked out from the report.
It's just another disappointment that goes along with the fiasco that was the India trip.
The review is a less detailed version of a classified report that was first produced in May, examining security questions. They were raised after it was learned Jaspal Atwal of BC, convicted of trying to assassinate an Indian government minister in 1986, that he had been put on the guest list for 2 events. When pressed to assess who invited Atwal and why, officials offered answers that signaled chaos and confusion. Eventually, it was learned that the invite came from a BC Liberal MP. Conservative leader Andrew Scheer calls the incident a diplomatic and security disaster. The Conservative opposition has found other reasons to criticize the Prime Minister in the last week. Last night, Andrew Scheer took issue with a tweet to comedian Trevor Noah, in which the Prime Minister pledged $50 million to a global education charity. Scheer also took issue with comments Justin Trudeau made about gender equality at the G20 summit in Buenos Aires. Here's what the Prime Minister had to say.
You might not say, oh, what does a gender lens have to do with building this new highway or this new pipeline or something? Well, there are gender impacts. When you bring construction workers into a rural area, there are social impacts because they're mostly male construction workers. How are you adjusting and adapting to those? That's what the gender lens in GBA Plus budgeting is all about. These are all things that we've been doing, not to be nice or to be better or to be moral, but to be smart about getting the very best out of all of our citizens and making the very best out of our economy, because women entrepreneurs tend to make better choices than others. We've seen it study after study.
All right, we'll deal with the $50 million and the Noah tweet in just a moment, but let's talk about this criticism and whether it's deserved. Joining me from Toronto tonight is Palmater. She's the Ryerson Chair in Indigenous Governance. She's also a lawyer. From Ottawa, Summa Strategies Vice Chair Tim Powers, and from Calgary, News Talk 770 host Rob Breckenridge. All right, let me first put on the table what Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative finance critic, taking the Prime Minister to task today during question period for those comments he made in Buenos Aires about male construction workers. Take a listen to this.
After this Prime Minister, the limousine Liberal went down to Argentina at an international conference while our workers are struggling at home, and he insults them and accuses them of creating negative social and gender impacts. That is absolutely disgusting and appalling, and the first thing this government should do is apologize for that despicable rhetoric. When will they apologize for insulting working men and women and scrap this No More Pipelines bill?
Rob Breckenridge, I'm going to start with you. Does the Prime Minister owe the male construction workers of this country an apology?
Well, I'm not one who goes around, looking for apologies necessarily, and I don't think that most Albertans are. But it's the kind of thing Trudeau never would have said here. The Prime Minister has a real tendency to play to his audience, or at least his perceived audience, and that's what he was doing. I mean, there's no way on earth that when he was in Calgary he would have said anything close to that. Look, it doesn't play well out here. I mean, at a time where we're trying to figure out how to get construction workers and others back to work, any kind of suggestion that there's some inherent risk in doing so. I mean, it does kind of come across as a bit of a slap in the face to people out here in Alberta who have been out of work for a long time, or people now with everything going on who are worried about their jobs. I mean, where's the focus on getting people back to work, whether it's here in Alberta, the potential of big job losses in Ontario? Really politically tone deaf, I think, on the Prime Minister's part.
Do you think politically tone deaf, Pam?
No, not at all. I mean, the statistics are pretty alarming that the very worst and most lethal and sexually violent people are coming from man camps. Canadian mining companies all around the world have been charged with killing Indigenous peoples, gang rapes. I mean, the worst kinds of violence you can imagine. We know from the tar sands that the rates of domestic violence are increasing. increased. There's higher rates of murdered and missing Indigenous women around anywhere where there's extraction and development and man camps. The very same can be said in the U.S., just across the border. So it is a really huge risk. I mean, it's too bad that it's kind of become about, you know, conservatives and liberals when it's a valid risk. And the upsetting part about that is not that he said it, it's that he doesn't apply any of these gender lenses here in Canada with regards to safety.
All right, let's talk about that in a second. Tim, I want to get your point of view on this. What do you think? Does the Prime Minister owe an apology to the people who work in these man camps?
Well, God forbid, Carol. I worked in one, and for 40 years, my father was in the construction industry in Labrador and in other parts of Canada, and lo and behold, he built roads, schools, other health facilities that the entire community and the regions benefited from. In those camps, to the best of my knowledge, there was never an incident. I'm not familiar with the reports that Pam is talking about. I won't dispute them because I don't know what the facts are, but this is typical of the Prime Minister, casting everybody with a broad brush, going after people. There are many construction workers from our region, yours and mine, as you know, who've gone all over the world and done lots of good work. How are they feeling? And they tend to vote Liberal. I think it was flippant. Perhaps if he had given some of the background that Pam just did, maybe it would have made more sense. But this is the sort of stuff that gets the Prime Minister in trouble. When he just throws it out there, he opens himself up to attack, and he besmirches tons of good people who built this country.
All right, well, who wants to go first out of that?
Well, I mean, you know, there's no price to be put on, you know, the safety and well-being of women and girls around this country, especially Indigenous women and girls. And yes, there may be, you know, roads and bridges and all of those other things, but the facts are the facts, and those are that anywhere where there's development, and it's even hydroelectric development and every kind of development, you have higher rates of sexualized violence against Indigenous women and girls, and it's something that hasn't been addressed.
Just Indigenous women and girls, or does it?
It's so there's higher rates of domestic violence for women and girls in general, and higher rates of child exploitation and human trafficking. But for Indigenous women and girls, it's actually higher rates of lethality. So there's more murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls, both in Canada and U.S., wherever there is development, and higher rates of man camps.
But Carol, I can give you practical examples. Again, the Mushwa Innu, who will be familiar to your audience. So the Innu and Davis Inlet Labrador, the CBC has well covered their plight for years and years and years. My father, other business people in Newfoundland and Labrador, began doing business with them, helping build capacity, creating opportunities for these people that didn't happen before. Justin Trudeau doesn't talk about that when he makes that statement. He casts aside all of that good work. Again, it's exceedingly flippant and very annoying for a lot of people in this country who have put a lot of time and effort on both the Indigenous and non-Indigenous sides to build cooperative partnerships to make a real difference. The Prime Minister shouldn't be talking about it in the manner in which he did.
Rob, what do you think of what Pam had to say and that point of view?
Well, look, the onus is on the Prime Minister here to back up the claim that he's making. Look, if the government has evidence of how this has been applied, or for that matter, where it should have been applied and what the consequences were of not doing so, then it's incumbent on them to present that. Otherwise, this comes across as mere rhetoric. And again, I think pandering to that specific audience. Look, if there are specific problems going on, then the Prime Minister should point to those, or he should explain why his government has failed to take action on any of these problems. Otherwise, it's rhetoric beyond anything in the way of specifics, which of course we didn't get from it.
Okay, the other thing is that he said, speaking of broad brushes, that women are better entrepreneurs than men. Pam.
Well, and so now he's created this divide. Are women better or men better? And that's not the question. The question is, they're supposed to be paid equally for equal work, that they're supposed to be embraced in the workplace in equal numbers, all of those kinds of things. I think he took it a step too far when he tried to say that women are better. I mean, I don't think anybody's saying that one gender is better than the other. Women have been historically excluded and treated as less than. But to go that far, he now creates divisions, and we don't need any more divisions. We actually need everyone to rally around gender equality for women and girls.
Okay. Tim?
You want to set me off again, Carol? Is that the aim of the panel tonight? No shock to everybody. I'm probably not a Justin Trudeau voter, but again, it's a naive, uninformed statement. I don't know what specific studies he's talking about. I think, as Pam just so eloquently said, it creates a gender divide where there doesn't need to be one. There are good female entrepreneurs, there are bad female entrepreneurs. There are good male entrepreneurs, there are bad female entrepreneurs. I don't know if it's as demarcated as the Prime Minister would suggest. I have 2 female business partners who are stellar and are excellent. Are they better business owners than the rest of us? I don't know, but I know we all work well together, and we don't want to be separated by, again, some naive prescription that the Prime Minister draws out to play, as Rob said, to a particular audience.
Okay. Canada will contribute $50 million to a global charity for children's education. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau tweeted that to comedian Trevor Noah. Here's what he tweeted last night from Buenos Aires. Hey, Trevor Noah, thanks for everything you're doing to celebrate Nelson Mandela's legacy at the Global Citizen Festival. Sorry I can't be with you, but how about Canada pledges $50 million to Edu? Cannot wait to support education for women and girls around the world. Work for you? Let's do it. All right, Rob, we'll start with you again. What do you think?
Well, and the common thread between these 2 issues is that it's all about the Prime Minister's brand. He says the kind of things that Stephen Harper wouldn't have said. He says the kinds of things that Donald Trump wouldn't say. He loves those fawning U.S. stories that, you know, look at this progressive Canadian Prime Minister. Boy, wouldn't we love to have him as our president. So it's really more about establishing his brand. He comes across as more of a brand ambassador than a Prime Minister. Look, this is the kind of announcement the International Development Minister would normally make, could have easily made. And apparently for 3 weeks they've been planning this tweet to respond to Trevor Noah. I mean, just imagine if Stephen Harper had made some foreign policy announcement in a tweet to, you know, Sean Hannity or somebody at Fox News. It's not how serious government business is done. And again, it's more about the appearance. It's more about his brand than anything else.
But aren't you going to reach a different, wider audience with a tweet than you are with a news release?
Well, what's the audience he's trying to reach? Trevor Noah's fans? I mean, do most Canadians even know who Trevor Noah is? I don't understand what he's trying to accomplish by doing it this way.
Pam, you're shaking your head.
Well, I mean, you've got a theme here where the really important issues are, you know, money for education for girls in countries where they might not get it. You know, you've got gender safety around construction, and then you have gender equality and hopefully more women entrepreneurs in business. All of these things are good, but for a self-proclaimed feminist, he's really stumbling around these things and really detracting from what should be a really concrete and core message. Now here you've got, you know, education for girls in countries where they might not get an education. Those are critical human rights issues. To make it in a tweet really it's almost like an offense to their dignity. You know, it's like a high five between a famous person and the Prime Minister. And it doesn't really consider the dignity of those girls, that this isn't just something showy for him, that this really the focus should all be on those girls getting this education. And it is a good thing that Canada's contributing, but he really detracts from the message about the girls.
Tim?
9.4 million. What's that? Trevor Noah's Twitter following. So it has great aggregation value. It's an important project. I agree with Pam and Rob on that. But again, it speaks to a broader tone deafness, I think, and a star-struckedness that people believe the Prime Minister and his team had. Last Monday night, we were on this program, Carol, talking about Oshawa being shut down. Later that week, Rachel Notley from Rob's Part of the World was here telling us how imperiled the oil industry was. Here's Justin Trudeau, who hasn't really said anything substantive over the course of the week other than he's concerned about those 2 issues, running out on a tweet, sucking up with a celebrity, announcing this investment. I think that's what gets people mad, particularly last week when there are so many Canadian domestic issues and Canadians who are worried about how they're going to put food on the table, and Trudeau's out doing this. It's easy criticism for his opposition critics. However, I will say this, his fans will like it, and there will be some in his voting cohort who will not get too fussed at all about this and buy this because they will see it as smart and progressive.
All right, we have to leave it on that note. Pam Palmater, Tim Powers, Rob Breckenridge, thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.